In just 43 seconds, one of Britain's most beloved actors would unleash a verbal assault so devastating that it would leave Lorraine Kelly speechless, her face flushed with embarrassment, and the studio audience gasping in collective shock. What started as a seemingly pleasant chat about Sir Ian McKellen's latest theatrical venture would spiral into an explosive confrontation that exposed the host's most controversial tactics, culminating in the legendary actor delivering a scathing takedown before storming off set in disgust. This is the untold story of how Lorraine Kelly's aggressive interviewing style finally met its match. The atmosphere in the ITV studio was electric, as Sir Ian McKellen, resplendent in a navy velvet jacket and his trademark knowing smile, settled into the familiar orange sofa. At 85, the theatrical knight commanded respect wherever he went, but this morning's appearance on Lorraine was supposed to be a simple promotional chat for his upcoming West End revival. What the production team hadn't anticipated was Kelly's apparent determination to dig into territories that would make even the most seasoned celebrity uncomfortable. "Sir Ian, welcome back to the show," Lorraine began, her Scottish accent thick with what seemed like genuine warmth. "You look absolutely wonderful, doesn't he, everyone?" The studio audience applauded dutifully, but McKellen's trained eye caught the slight tension in Kelly's posture, the way her fingers drummed against her cue cards. Something was brewing beneath that trademark smile. "Thank you, Lorraine. Always a pleasure to be here," McKellen replied, his rich baritone filling the studio. But even as he spoke, he noticed how Kelly's eyes weren't quite meeting his, how she kept glancing at her notes with an intensity that suggested this wouldn't be the light-hearted conversation his publicist had promised. The first few minutes proceeded normally enough. They discussed his upcoming role in King Lear, the challenges of performing Shakespeare at his age, and his enduring passion for the theater. McKellen was in his element, charming and articulate as always, regaling the audience with behind-the-scenes anecdotes that had them laughing and hanging on his every word. But Kelly seemed restless, constantly checking the time and cutting him off mid-story with abrupt transitions. "That's fascinating, Ian, but I want to talk about something else," Kelly interrupted, just as McKellen was describing a particularly amusing rehearsal mishap. The shift in her tone was subtle but unmistakable. Gone was the warm presenter voice, replaced by something sharper, more calculating. "You've been very vocal about LGBTQ+ rights throughout your career, haven't you?" McKellen straightened slightly, his decades of experience immediately alerting him to the change in atmosphere. "Yes, I have. It's been an important part of my life's work, advocating for equality and acceptance." Right, Kelly nodded, but there was something predatory about her expression now. "And you came out publicly in 1988, which was quite brave for the time. But I have to ask, Ian, and forgive me for being direct, don't you think some people might say you've been rather opportunistic about it?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The studio audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the sudden tension. McKellen's eyebrows rose slowly, his performer's instincts immediately recognizing a deliberate provocation when he heard one. "I'm sorry, Lorraine, but what exactly do you mean by opportunistic?" His voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the silk now. Years of dealing with homophobic critics and closed-minded journalists had taught him to recognize an ambush when he saw one. Kelly leaned forward, her smile becoming increasingly artificial. "Well, coming out when it became fashionable, using your sexuality as a sort of marketing tool for your activism. Some might argue it's been quite beneficial for your career, hasn't it? All those awards and honors." The studio fell silent, except for the low hum of the cameras. McKellen's face had gone very still, the kind of stillness that preceded either a devastating theatrical performance or a complete loss of composure. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried the weight of decades of discrimination and struggle. "Lorraine, I think you need to be very careful about what you're suggesting here." Each word was precisely enunciated, delivered with the kind of controlled fury that only a master actor could achieve. "Are you seriously implying that I chose to come out during a time when homosexuality was still largely reviled, when it could have destroyed my career, for personal gain?" Kelly realized she had struck a nerve, but instead of backing down, she pressed forward with the reckless abandon of someone who had mistaken controversy for compelling television. I'm just saying, Ian, that timing is everything in show business, isn't it? And your activism has certainly kept you in the spotlight. Stop! McKellen's voice cut through her words like a blade. The single word carried such authority that Kelly actually flinched. Just stop right there. His eyes, which moments before had been twinkling with theatrical charm, now burned with genuine anger. The transformation was remarkable to witness. This was no longer the avuncular knight entertaining morning television viewers. This was an actor at the height of his powers, and he was furious. The tension in the studio had become palpable. Camera operators were zooming in, sensing that they were capturing something unprecedented. Kelly, perhaps realizing she had pushed too far but unable to find a graceful retreat, doubled down on her aggressive approach. Sir Ian, I understand you're upset, but these are questions that people are asking. As a journalist, I have a responsibility to... As a journalist? McKellen interrupted, his voice rising for the first time. Is that what you call this ambush masquerading as an interview? This calculated attempt to diminish a lifetime of advocacy by suggesting it was some sort of cynical career move? What happened next would be talked about for years to come, as the full force of McKellen's theatrical training and personal conviction collided with Kelly's increasingly desperate attempts to maintain control of an interview that was rapidly spiraling beyond her capabilities. McKellen stood up slowly from the orange sofa, his imposing 6-foot frame casting a shadow over Kelly, who remained seated, suddenly looking very small and vulnerable. The studio lights caught the fury in his eyes as he looked down at her, with the kind of contempt usually reserved for the most despicable of Shakespearean villains. You want to talk about opportunism, Lorraine? McKellen's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow managed to fill every corner of the studio. Let's talk about a presenter who built her career on saccharine morning television, suddenly deciding to play hardball journalist when she smells blood in the water. Let's talk about someone who thinks controversy equals credibility. Kelly's face had gone pale, but her producer was frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, urging her to push forward. The ratings were through the roof, and despite the car crash nature of the interview, this was the kind of television moment that would be replayed for years. Against every instinct screaming at her to apologize and move on, Kelly chose to dig deeper into the hole she had created. Sir Ian, if you could just sit back down, we can discuss this rationally. Rationally? McKellen's laugh was bitter and theatrical. There's nothing rational about what you've just suggested. Do you have any idea what it was like in 1988? Do you remember Section 28, Lorraine? Do you remember when being gay was considered a mental illness? When we were told we were corrupting children? When coming out meant losing jobs, losing family, losing everything? The studio audience was completely silent now, transfixed by the raw emotion pouring from the veteran actor. Several crew members had stopped working entirely, their equipment forgotten as they watched this masterclass in controlled rage unfold before them. Kelly's hands were visibly shaking as she clutched her cue cards. I didn't mean to suggest that your struggles weren't real, but surely you can understand why some people might question the timing. Some people? McKellen's voice rose to a roar that made several audience members jump. What people, Lorraine? Give me names. Show me these mysterious critics who think I chose to become a target for hatred and discrimination for career advancement. Because I'd very much like to meet these people who think being spat at in the street, receiving death threats, and watching friends die of AIDS while the government ignored them was some sort of publicity stunt. The cameras captured every moment as McKellen began to pace, his theatrical training taking over as he delivered what could only be described as a masterclass in righteous fury. Kelly looked like she wanted to disappear into the sofa cushions, her carefully constructed presenter persona crumbling under the weight of McKellen's verbal assault. You know what's truly opportunistic, Lorraine, McKellen continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of his classical training. Sitting in your comfortable studio in 2025, with all the progress that's been made, with marriage equality and legal protections, and having the unmitigated gall to suggest that those of us who fought for these rights did so for personal gain. It's historically ignorant, morally bankrupt, and frankly disgusting. Kelly made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. Sir Ian, I think you're overreacting. This is supposed to be a friendly morning show. And you're making this unnecessarily confrontational. I'm making this confrontational? McKellen whirled around to face her, his eyes blazing. You ambush me with accusations about opportunism, question the sincerity of my advocacy, and then have the audacity to suggest I'm the problem here. This is rich, even by morning television standards. The studio floor manager was frantically trying to signal for a commercial break, but Kelly, perhaps sensing that her career was already damaged beyond repair, decided to make one final, catastrophic stand. Look, Ian, I'm sorry if I touched a nerve, but as a broadcaster, I have to ask the difficult questions. That's what good journalism is about, perhaps if you weren't so sensitive about the topic. The word sensitive hung in the air like a lit fuse. McKellen went completely still, and for a moment, the only sound in the studio was the low hum of the air conditioning. When he spoke again, his voice was so quiet that the boom operators had to strain to pick it up. Did you just call me sensitive for objecting to having my life's work dismissed as opportunism? Each word was delivered with surgical precision, designed for maximum impact. Did you really just suggest that my anger at your ignorant, homophobic insinuations is somehow unreasonable? Kelly realized she had made a fatal error, but it was far too late. McKellen was no longer just angry. He was hurt, and a hurt Ian McKellen was a dangerous thing indeed. The man who had brought Gandalf and Magneto to life was about to unleash something far more powerful than any fictional character. You want to see sensitive, Lorraine? McKellen's voice began to rise again, building toward what everyone in the studio could sense would be a devastating crescendo. Let me tell you about sensitive. Sensitive is watching your community die while people like you pretended we didn't exist. Sensitive is having to hide who you are for decades because society told you that you were an abomination. Sensitive is finally finding the courage to live authentically and then having some morning television host suggest it was all a bloody marketing strategy. The profanity hit like a thunderclap in the usually sanitized environment of morning television. Several audience members gasped, and Kelly looked like she had been physically struck, but McKellen wasn't finished. Not even close. What followed would be remembered as one of the most devastating takedowns in British television history, as the full force of McKellen's decades of experience, both as an actor and as an activist, came crashing down on Kelly's increasingly desperate attempts to salvage what remained of the interview. McKellen stepped closer to Kelly's chair, his presence now utterly commanding the space. The man who had mesmerized audiences as King Lear was about to deliver a performance that would dwarf anything he had ever done on stage. His voice, when it came, was measured, controlled, and absolutely lethal. You know what the real tragedy is here, Lorraine? McKellen began, his tone deceptively calm. It's not just that you've revealed yourself to be a thoroughly unprofessional hack masquerading as a journalist. It's that you've done it while millions of people are watching, including young LGBTQ+ individuals who might have looked up to you, who might have thought they had an ally in mainstream media. Kelly tried to interrupt, her voice barely a whisper. Ian, please, I never meant... Oh, but you did mean it. McKellen cut her off with surgical precision. This wasn't some off-the-cuff remark or an unfortunate slip of the tongue. You planned this. You sat there with your research team, with your producers, and you decided that attacking a gay man's authenticity would make for good television. You looked at my life, at everything I've sacrificed and fought for, and you thought, how can I turn this into a spectacle? The studio was dead silent except for McKellen's voice, which seemed to fill every corner with its controlled fury. Kelly's face had gone from pale to ashen, her carefully applied makeup doing nothing to hide the devastation written across her features. Do you want to know what opportunism really looks like? McKellen continued, beginning to pace again like a caged lion. It looks like a host who's been playing it safe for decades suddenly deciding to throw grenades because her ratings are slipping. It looks like someone who's never faced real adversity trying to tear down someone who has, because she thinks it makes her look brave and edgy. Kelly made one final, pathetic attempt to regain control. Sir Ian, I think we should take a break and... No. The word came out like a gunshot. You wanted this conversation, Lorraine. You ambushed me with it. So now you're going to sit there and listen to every word I have to say. McKellen moved to center stage, positioning himself between Kelly and the cameras, his theatrical instincts taking complete control. What happened next was less an interview and more a one-man show, delivered with all the power and gravitas that had made him one of Britain's greatest actors. I came out in 1988 on a radio program because a journalist asked me directly, and I was tired of lying. Not because it was strategically advantageous. Christ. It nearly ended my career before it properly began. Not because it was trendy. We were in the middle of the AIDS crisis, and Section 28 had just been passed. I did it because I could no longer live with the shame of hiding who I was, even if it meant losing everything I'd worked for. His voice began to rise, decades of suppressed pain and anger finally finding their outlet. Do you know what happened after that, Lorraine? Do you know what your opportunistic career move actually cost me? I lost roles, I lost friends, I received death threats. My own family struggled to accept it, but I kept fighting, kept speaking out, because someone had to. Because young people were killing themselves rather than face the shame of being different. And I refused to contribute to that silence any longer. Kelly was crying now, her professional composure completely shattered. The mascara running down her cheeks only emphasized how thoroughly she had been demolished by McKellen's verbal precision. But he wasn't finished. Not yet. You want to talk about awards and honors? McKellen's voice dripped with contempt. Every single recognition I've received has come despite my sexuality, not because of it. The knighthood, the acting awards, the honorary degrees, they all came from an industry and a society that barely tolerated people like me. I had to be twice as good, twice as professional, twice as unassailable as my straight colleagues, just to be considered for the same opportunities. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment of what was essentially a masterclass in righteous indignation. McKellen had transformed the studio into his personal theater, and Kelly was nothing more than a prop in his devastating monologue. But here's what really pisses me off, Lorraine, McKellen said, allowing his refined accent to slip slightly, making his words even more cutting. It's not just that you've insulted me personally. It's that you've insulted every LGBTQ+ person who's ever had to fight for acceptance, who's ever been told they were wrong or sick or unnatural. Your little theory about opportunism doesn't just diminish my struggles, it diminishes all of ours. Kelly tried once more to speak, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry, I really didn't. You're sorry now, McKellen roared, his voice filling the studio with such force that several crew members stepped back. You're sorry because you've been exposed as the small-minded, ratings-obsessed charlatan you really are. You're sorry because you thought you could bully an old gay man on live television and get away with it. Well, congratulations, Lorraine. You've certainly made television history today. McKellen began moving toward the edge of the set, his exit clearly imminent. But he wasn't going to leave without delivering one final, devastating blow that would ensure this moment lived forever in television infamy. You know what the most pathetic part of all this is? He said, turning back to face Kelly one last time. Tomorrow, you'll probably claim this was all a misunderstanding. You'll issue some mealy-mouthed apology written by your publicist, talking about how you misspoke, or how your questions were taken out of context. But we all know the truth, don't we? We all saw who you really are when you thought you could get away with it. McKellen began removing his microphone with deliberate slowness, each movement calculated for maximum dramatic effect. I've spent my entire career bringing characters to life, Lorraine. But you've managed something I never could. You've killed your own character completely, live on television, in front of millions of people. The microphone hit the floor with a small thud that seemed to echo through the stunned silence. McKellen straightened his jacket, smoothed his hair, and looked directly into the nearest camera. To anyone watching who might be struggling with their identity, who might be afraid to be who they really are, please don't let people like this discourage you. Your authenticity is not opportunism. Your truth is not a marketing strategy. And you are worth so much more than the small-minded prejudices of morning television hosts who mistake cruelty for journalism. With that, Sir Ian McKellen turned and walked off the set with all the dignity and gravitas of the theatrical knight he was. His footsteps echoed through the silent studio as he disappeared behind the cameras, leaving Lorraine Kelly sitting alone on her orange sofa, tears streaming down her face, her career in ruins, and her true character exposed for all the world to see. The cameras continued to roll for several more seconds, capturing Kelly's complete breakdown, before finally cutting to an emergency commercial break. But the damage was done. In less than 20 minutes, one of Britain's most respected morning television hosts had been utterly destroyed by a master of his craft who refused to let ignorance and prejudice masquerade as legitimate journalism. It was, without question, one of the most spectacular self-destructions in British television history.